You know, there's a pretty grim saying in aviation: every safety rule is written in blood. It's a chilling thought, but it's also true. The entire history of flying safety is really a history of learning from tragedy. But what happens when the solution to one disaster, well, what if it unintentionally creates a brand new one? So let's dive into this cycle of problem and solution, a story that's literally been forged in the fire of some truly catastrophic accidents.
And that brings us to the central question, the real puzzle we need to unpack. How on earth can two planes collide in a perfectly clear sky? You've got perfect visibility, a beautiful day, and then disaster. It just seems impossible, right? But this exact scenario forced the entire aviation industry to confront a absolutely terrifying reality.
And our story really comes to a head right here, over a quiet suburb of Los Angeles called Cerritos. An Aeromexico DC-9 is on its final approach to LAX. Everything seems normal, and then it just falls out of the sky. It goes into this catastrophic nosedive. On the ground, nobody can figure out what is happening, but up in the sky, a mid-air collision has just sealed the fate of everyone on board.
This account from one of the very first firefighters on the scene, it just paints a horrific picture. I mean, the crash didn't just claim the lives of everyone on both planes, it also killed 15 people on the ground. The question of how demanded an answer, and to find it, we actually have to go back in time.
You see, the seeds of that Los Angeles disaster, they were actually sown a full decade earlier. The 1970s saw these two horrific collisions that exposed a really fundamental flaw in aviation, just how fallible human communication can be, not just between pilots and controllers, but between the pilots themselves.
And these two events, Zagreb and Tenerife, became infamous turning points in aviation history. They were just brutal, large-scale tragedies that showed everyone how simple, tiny breakdowns in communication could lead to the worst possible outcome imaginable.
Okay, so over Zagreb, the system itself basically created the disaster. The airspace was split up into these altitude sectors, right? And a plane climbing from one to the next needed a really clean handover. But the controller for the upper sector, a man named Gradimir Tosic, was just dangerously overworked. Get this, he was on his third straight 12-hour shift, and in a moment of overload, he missed the one piece of information that mattered. A charter flight was climbing directly into the path of a British Airways plane. The result? A high-altitude collision at a combined speed of over 1,000 miles per hour. Every single one of the 176 people on both planes was killed. It was such a stark lesson in the dangers of controller fatigue and, just simple procedural failure.
And then, just 1 year later, an even bigger catastrophe. A bomb threat at another airport forced all these massive jumbo jets to divert to this tiny airport on an island called Tenerife. The airport just wasn't equipped for this kind of traffic. And then, to make matters worse, a thick fog rolled in. Suddenly, you have two Boeing 747s on the same runway, completely invisible to each other and to the control tower.
Now this is what's so wild. The entire disaster hinged on a single word. The KLM pilot, he was getting impatient, he wanted to leave, so he reported that he was at takeoff. The Spanish controller replied with, "Okay," but he meant to say, "Okay, stand by for takeoff." But the KLM pilot, Jacob von Zanten, a very senior captain, only heard that okay. He took it as clearance and he started his takeoff roll, plowing directly into the Pan Am 747 that was still on the runway. 583 people died, all because of the word okay.
Well, the lesson was brutal, but it was crystal clear. Ambiguity had to be eliminated from the cockpit, period. This slide shows that change perfectly. Vague words like okay and roger, gone. Banned. Pilots would no longer say they were ready for takeoff. That phrase was now reserved only for the controller giving the final absolute clearance. The new standardized language was designed to be unmistakable. But as that 1986 Los Angeles crash proved, better language, well, it wasn't enough. You can have perfect communication with the tower, sure, but what about seeing the other plane right next to you in the sky? The crucial point was this: you simply can't rely on pilots to see each other in an increasingly crowded sky. So the industry needed a technological solution. And that solution was TCAS, the Traffic Collision and Avoidance System. And this was, no joke, revolutionary. For the very first time, planes had a way to communicate directly with each other using radio signals. It created this kind of digital safety net that didn't rely on human eyes or human voices at all.
So here's basically how it works. Each plane's transponder is constantly sending out signals, creating this sort of protective radio bubble around it. If two of these bubbles get too close, the system gives the pilots a heads up, a traffic advisory. It literally says, traffic, traffic. But if they get even closer and a collision looks imminent, TCAS issues what's called a resolution advisory, an unambiguous life-saving command like climb or descend.
And just like that, the problem of mid-air collisions seemed to be solved for good. It felt like technology had finally triumphed where human perception had failed. By making TCAS mandatory on all commercial aircraft, the skies were supposed to be safer than ever before. But, as we're about to see, sometimes the solution creates a whole new problem.
And this brings us to the dramatic and tragic twist in our story. The system that was designed to be foolproof was about to be put to the ultimate test. And it created this new, terrifying dilemma. What happens when the human and the machine give conflicting orders at the exact same time?
The setting for this is the sky over Germany in 2002. We've got a DHL cargo plane and a Bashirian Airlines charter flight, and they are converging. Aboard that charter flight were 45 of Russia's brightest children on their way to a holiday in Spain, a reward for being amazing at academics and art. The stakes just couldn't have been higher.
Meanwhile, on the ground, a perfect storm was brewing. The air traffic controller, Peter Nielsen, was working the overnight shift completely alone. His main ground-based collision alert system was offline for maintenance. His phone lines were also down. He was literally running between two different workstations, trying to manage a sky full of planes by himself. So aboard the Russian passenger jet, the TCAS system did its job flawlessly. It saw the DHL cargo plane and it issued a command, climb, climb. But at almost the exact same second, the overworked controller, Peter Nielsen, also spotted the conflict on his radar and yelled an order to the Russian pilot, descend. The pilot was now facing an impossible choice. Does he obey the machine in his cockpit, or does he obey the human authority he's been trained his entire career to trust? He made the choice that, based on decades of training, seemed logical. He followed the human command. He pushed his plane into a descent. At the exact same time, the DHL pilot, following his TCAS advisory, also descended. The two planes flew directly into each other. All 71 people, including all 45 children, were killed. The aftermath of the Überlingen disaster was just one of profound grief and so many searching questions. The system had failed in a way nobody had ever even thought of. But out of this final terrible tragedy, the ultimate rule of the sky would finally be written.
This finding from the official German crash report, well, it says it all. In creating TCAS, this technological savior, the entire aviation world had overlooked one critical question. Who has the final say? Man or machine? The system had a fatal blind spot.
And so the ultimate rule was finally written. Today, this new hierarchy of command is drilled into every single commercial pilot around the world. If you get a TCAS resolution advisory, you follow it. Period. It doesn't matter what the air traffic controller says, the machine now has the ultimate authority, because it has a perfect real-time view of the sky that a human on the ground just can't match.
This whole journey, from the simple misunderstandings at Tenerife to the complex human-machine conflict over Überlingen, it really reveals the core of our story. Each disaster exposed a weakness, and each solution, while making the skies safer, sometimes created a new, unforeseen challenge. So you see, aviation safety isn't some destination you arrive at. It's a continuous, never-ending process of learning from failure. The system we have today is incredibly robust, built on the hard lessons of Zagreb, Tenerife, LA, and Überlingen. But it does leave us with a final, kind of lingering question. As we rely more and more on automation and AI to keep us safe, what are the new conflicts, the new impossible choices that we haven't even thought to look for yet?